Good evening, colleagues and professor. We are with Group 1 and today's presentation is about linguistic imperialism. In this presentation, we focus on answering two questions. What is linguistic imperialism and how might the teaching of English be considered an aspect of linguistic imperialism? To answer the first questions about linguistic imperialism, it's necessary to understand some concepts like imperialism, language, linguistic imperialism, and linguism. So, the term imperialism comes from the Latin word imperium, that it refers a supreme power or an absolute authority. When we talk about imperialism, we mean the policy of a nation to forcefully impose its rules or authority over other nations throughout the acquisition of lands or the imposition of language, culture, economic, and political domination. Language definition. Imperialism brings about the rise of a certain language as a dominant one and make it a weapon for distributing power. According to Philipson, language is a very powerful tool for the control of people and countries because people can see a language as the language of education, civilization, power, and access to social goods. Imperialism spread throughout language because it becomes a necessity for all of those who wish to advance socially and to participate in the public sphere.
Linguistic imperialism is the imposition of a language on a speaker of the other languages. For Spolsky, 2004 is defined as the intentional destruction of a powerless language by a dominant one. For Philipson 2018, the study of linguistic imperialism focuses on how and why certain languages dominate internationally. For Rose and Kahneman 2018, English imperialism is the exploitation of the ideological, cultural, and elitist power of English for the economic and political advantage by dominant English-speaking cultures. Philipson defined it as a subtype of cultural imperialism along with media, educational, and scientific imperialism. For Philipson, linguistic imperialism involves the following factor. It joins a structure of imperialism in culture, education, media, communication, economy, politics, and military activities. In a sense, it's about exploitation, injustice, inequality, and hierarchy that privilege those able to use the dominant language. There is a favoritism to the dominant language and some different privilege to its users. It's structural. Materials, resources, and infrastructure are accorded to the dominant language than others. It is ideological. Beliefs, attitudes, and imagery glorify the dominant language, stigmatize others, and justify the linguistic hierarchy. The dominance is hegemonic and keeps its hegemonic as it's internalized and naturalized and seen as normal. Language use is often subtractive. Proficiency in the imperial language and in learning it in education involving its consolidation by the detriment of the other languages. It is a form of linguism, favoring a language over others in ways that parallel societal structuring through racism, sexism, and class. Linguism serves to privilege users of the dominant language which represent linguistic capital. Linguistic imperialism is invariable, contested, and resisted. Linguism's concept. It refers to discrimination and prejudice on the ground of language. It has been defined as ideologies, structure, and practices which are used to legitimate, effectuate, and reproduce an unequal division of power and resources between groups which are defined on the basis of language. Other concept. Stugnap Kangas 1988 coined the term linguism as a form of discrimination of languages. He also pointed it out as the discrimination based on language difference that unfairly suffers certain linguistic communities. Linguicide or linguistic genocide is when a speaker changes to the new language and their own language disappears.
English teaching and linguistic imperialism. We can explain better the position of the English teaching considered as an aspect of the linguistic imperialism into the observation of the language fallacies. English language teaching fallacies. One fallacy is exposed by Philipson when it's predicated that no native English speakers are superior and ideal models in comparison to those whose native language is not the target one. Teaching English as a second language or as a foreign language through a native speaker model is a clear example of a linguistic imperialist influence over the language rights, where English language is being used by a globalized society not only with a communicative purpose, but also with another different intentions in order to be more competent in front of the demands of the current economic system. According to Moreno, the belief of a global language concept is another fallacy which hides the reality of the imposition of a language with its dominant force exerted over the dominated countries. The problem is that this belief of superiority has been spread out over the society until those days, causing an adoption of mistakes concepts of the language and the growing of a dominant and negative ideology. The native fallacy considers the language variations as non-standardized forms of the language. In this point, it is necessary to recognize all the variations or different forms of the language as parts of a whole language or a whole stone. The whole language system improves its structure, adapting their variations. Without those variations, there is no evolution of the language.
Continue to answer question number 2. It's important to understand that English has become a golden key to keep pace with technological, economic, and social advances and has assisted an integration with the rest of the world, according with Jenkins 2006. Talking about linguistic imperialism or language imperialism is a linguistic concept that involves the transfer of a dominant language to other people. That is to say, that throughout language, the dominant culture transfer the cultural aspect throughout language. Learning a dominant language provides power and prestige to its user, which leads to social discrimination. So the idea is that the speakers of the dominant group have greater social mobility. A language is made up of cultural elements, according with Altetkin, Pennycoot, and Philipson. Therefore, when learning a language, some of those elements are naturally imposed on its learners. We can conclude that linguistic imperialism shows that language is one of the manifestations of European imperial expansion in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Also, we can say that linguistic imperialism occurs in two folds: conscientization of a people to gradually shift from their language, and the shift of a language for social, economic, and political benefits. We can also say that English language has a role in linguistic imperialism because it becomes barrier against education. It is a symbolic language which affects known speakers' social, personal, and economic life. Not English speaker will have sense of inferiority over English people, and the more popularity of English will lead our indigenous languages and culture to the brink of death. That is all. Thank you so much for your attention.